Episode 5 of Pluribus has just been released. Wait, it's Wednesday. Well, to answer the question that many of you might have, Apple wanted to avoid the episode clashing with Thanksgiving and also Black Friday, so they decided to stick it out today instead. And to be honest, I didn't mind in the slightest. It meant we got it sooner. This episode of Pluribus was arguably the most intimate one that we've had, and I'd say it's the episode that left us on the largest cliffhanger of them all too, as we got a glimpse into the other's strange dietary requirements. So with that, let's dive into this episode, break it down, look at the deeper themes, answer what Carol could have potentially gasped at during the ending, and also discuss everything there is to take away from it. Here is Pluribus Episode 5 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The opening scene. When the episode opened up, in my mind it felt like it was all about two main things: creating an unsettling environment with getting across that the others had a sense of frustration with Carol due to the way that she'd essentially caused Zosia to have a cardiac arrest and wasn't taking responsibility for her actions. But as well, it was also about reinforcing the hive mind mentality to us again in showing that anybody could do anything, something we've not properly seen since the TGI worker was flying the plane in episode 2. The first sense that was triggered when the episode opened up was sound, and that was due to the beeping of the heart rate monitor in the hospital to show us that this was taking place moments after Zosia needed to have CPR administered. And then, as the camera slowly moved back through the hallway, we saw that a man was sitting there drinking a carton of milk whilst on the hospital bed. This not only connected to the title of the episode, which is Got Milk, but it was also putting the very thing that would be at the epicenter of this episode right in front of us the moment that it opened, showing us just how important these cartons of milk were going to be, and that it was going to be the very thing that triggered the chain of events which ultimately led Carol to make a large revelation during the ending. During this opening scene, we saw that anybody and everybody was basically walking through the hallways. We had a kid wheeling a trolley and even a woman in a leather skirt who looked like she could have been on a night out when the joining happened around a week ago. So it reinforced that shared knowledge and hive mind mentality, and that everything was accessible by everybody, and that the state that you were left in was how you'd most likely be forever. Once the camera had moved enough to establish the environment and also showed us that Zosia was in a condition where she was stable but was being monitored and was unconscious, the camera moved around to Carol, who had the complete opposite demeanor to what everybody else had. We were shown that she was squeezing a stress toy, she had grazes on her hands and arm, and the handcuff was still trapped around her wrist, almost showing us that entrapped nature that she had, where she didn't have any of the answers that she was looking for, and she wasn't going to be told them by anybody that was there. She was trapped in this world that was now a shell of the past, and it wasn't going to change unless she did something about it. Something that was also reinforced when she found the key to her handcuffs when she just stopped for a moment and breathed right at the end of the episode. Lakshmi then called the hospital to speak with Carol, and she complained to her about the fact that Carol made her son cry. Honestly, Lakshmi is the character that I dislike the most in the show, even more than Carol. She's selfish and insufferable and isn't using a single one of her brain cells to realize that her son is long gone and that she has the mind of the entire population sat in front of her. However, what the importance of this moment was for us and Carol to realize that it wasn't only the people in the proximity that were crying when Zosia was going into cardiac arrest, but it was everybody that was infected around the entire planet, showing that not being able to give one person what they want is enough to trigger sadness within all of them, because all they want to do is make people happy, so the level of upset was extremely large. It was felt across the mass, just like when they're on the receiving end of frustration and anger. The others were being closed off compared to usual with Carol. They didn't look her in the eye or really even acknowledge her. It was only when Carol asked about Zosia that they responded. This then tied into the fact that they all upped and left Albuquerque because they felt they needed space. This showed that Carol could well have been onto something, and that an overbearing sense of emotion, whatever kind it is, causes mass reactions, and the others clearly didn't like that they felt like Carol was using the fact that they couldn't lie to her advantage. When the group noticed that Carol fell asleep, they decided to leave the hospital. Carol staying there and falling asleep was something that in my mind showed an ounce of humanity from her, because she was choosing to stay in the hospital to make sure that Zosia was okay, rather than going back to hers. But also, I felt like she didn't want to go back because she hadn't slept in her own bed since Helen died, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. I wonder if the others chose to leave when they did because they knew that they wouldn't be able to lie to Carol about where they were going, and they didn't want her to stop them. So that was almost like their loophole. The way this scene was constructed was really nice. There was this continual camera movement that worked so well, but also at the same time, there was this choral piece of music that was just constantly building in volume until we saw the revelation that they were all leaving. It kind of got across that cult-like mindset that they had and the creepy togetherness of it all. The shots when Carol woke up where the camera was in the corner of the room or at odd angles in the hallways allowed us to basically see two environments in one, and it got across the emptiness of the setting. Something that we'd feel on multiple occasions throughout this episode because the group had left her completely on her own in the town. We thought she was alone before, and she felt that too, but in actually knowing that there was nobody else in the city, it provided an uncomfortable and eerie backdrop. Even hearing that voicemail message where the others explained that they simply needed space, even though they were still there for her and wanted to make her happy, in not hearing a live voice, it really got across that sense of emptiness. I also loved the shot where Carol was heading up onto the roof to see where everybody was going. The slight blur as the camera was looking over the city felt like it represented Carol's fatigued state, and it wanted us to feel that. The camera only came into focus and locked onto what was ahead when she stopped and looked, so it had a strong feeling of immersion to it. 8 days, 22 hours, and 36 minutes. When the main section of the episode truly began, Carol had decided that it was time that she tried to reach out to the 12 other survivors that hadn't been infected. With the revelations that she made where she found out that the others couldn't lie and that there was also a way to reverse the process of the joining, she knew that she wouldn't be able to do it on her own, and she wanted the other survivors to help her. I thought it was interesting that Carol touched up her makeup and removed the bottles of alcohol from the background of her shot to make it look like she could be taken a bit more seriously, and like she wasn't some kind of drunk. I also thought Carol realizing that there was strength in numbers showed us that there was a sense of her overcoming that isolated mindset that it feels like she'd always had. It was with the video recordings that she then asked the others to create 12 copies and to also translate the video into the native language for those that needed it translated. Within the video, Carol mentioned how the others abandoned the city that she lived in, and whilst we know that the others want to make her happy, we don't truly know why they left. This had all the makings of what usually happens when a couple get into a fight and they need some space. So I think even though it doesn't seem like the others can be frustrated or angry with Carol because it goes against their core, they might have left because they felt the only way they'd make her happy is by not being there. I do have another theory where the other's strength comes in the feeling of love and happiness that they have, and if Carol is letting off her frustration towards them, causing them to fit and even making them feel sad and cry, I wonder if that's what weakens the hold that they have within one another. So by staying away from Carol for a short while, it almost allows them to regroup within the mind and for the glue to hold. If we think back to when we first saw this virus type thing spread, it was done with a kiss. So love and happiness makes up their core. When Carol was done with the video, she left her name on the label of the envelope that the SD card was on. So this would automatically put her address in the hands of all of the other people that are out there. So with Manusis being intrigued by Carol in the previous episode, this would give him a touch point of where to reach her. We know that he's untrustworthy of the others, and with there being a clip in the trailer of him driving himself around, I wonder if he's going to attempt to drive along the Pan American Highway, which is a network of roads that connects North and South America, so he doesn't then have to try and trust the others. Or Carol revealing the fact that they can't lie might be something that does ultimately make him trust them. The scene that followed this was when Carol made her dinner and we saw her put the bottle down after considering a drink. As I've said several times over the course of the season so far, drink is the thing that seems to keep Carol going and has been a comfort blanket, not only throughout the short time that we've known her, but also from before we knew her, as her car was fitted with the alcohol interlock device, showing that she struggled with her relationship with it for a while. As she was eating, there was a photo of Helen that was ever so slightly in focus in the corner of the frame, and it was almost showing us that Helen was still at the core of Carol and the show. And it also hinted at the importance that Helen would have in the episode moving forward, as she ultimately did. Carol hadn't slept in her own bed since Helen passed away, and she took the leap in this episode to get into it. We saw Helen's eye mask and her unread books that still laid there. Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None was at the top. This book is about 10 people that were murderers that were invited to an isolated island where they were killed off one by one. The core themes within this novel are essentially focused on the consequences of past actions coming back to haunt you, which could connect to Carol's past and her avoiding something, but also the 10 could be 13 in this instance, and the remote island could be the planet, as that's what it kind of feels like with this show, as the others are essentially coming after them. But on a more simple term, the book being titled "And Then There Were None," and Carol not being in bed with Helen, the love of her life, there's no one there now, so it could just be calling that out. When Carol got into bed, she couldn't face the emptiness that she was now going to be faced with every night when she went to sleep. Whereas before, there was love and warmth, the coldness in Carol's heart and also in the bed was reflected in the lighting of the shot and the slight blue hue that was there. This was the first true step of Carol starting to realize that she needed to move on for the betterment of herself. The slight reluctance to put on Helen's eye mask but going ahead with doing it showed that she was slowly bringing herself to that point. When the Coyotes went into her yard and started eating the trash, this was something again that got across just how alone Carol now was in not even having the others nearby, as she was left to fend for herself in scaring them off. There was no Helen and not even the others. The lights that made up the cityscape were off and her only company was a golf club. There's something about Carol threatening the Coyotes for eating her trash which subconsciously continued to taint the perception of her, because the others had previously mentioned how they'd never harm any living creature. But here Carol was, prepared to harm them over some trash. Plus, Carol also had all of the lights switched on throughout her home and the city when it didn't impact her in the slightest, so she wasn't thinking about the preservation of energy like the others were. It just posed that question again on if a hive mind would be better for the planet in the long run. Carol's attitude following the incident with the coyote also solidified how it felt like she hadn't truly taken responsibility for what happened to Zosia, and it being her fault. She was being demanding over the phone, rude, and not recognizing that the others wanted space from her because maybe there was a chance that she had actually upset them with the way that she acted. What started with it seeming like Carol actually cared about what happened to Zosia with not wanting to leave the hospital had turned into her having an attitude again and coming across as quite unlikable. The real turning point in the episode though came when Carol wanted the drone to take out the trash and she caused it to break, showing again that she wasn't following polite requests and was in turn making things worse for herself. When she had to deal with the trash, that was when she noticed that there were milk cartons that had filled up all of the recycle bins, and it gave us an insight into what the others were regularly consuming, also connecting back to the first thing that we were shown in the entire episode, that man slurping a carton of milk. It turned out that the others weren't actually consuming milk from the cartons though. When Carol went to the Duke City dairy factory, she saw that the others were mixing this strange white substance with water, which was coming out as this amber-type colored liquid that didn't smell like anything, had the texture of olive oil, and had a pH level of 7.1, which meant that it was almost neutral. Whilst this seemed like an interesting revelation for her to make, and she video recorded it to send to the other survivors, we saw that it was actually something that meant nothing to her in that specific moment, provided no revelation, and it just made her more frustrated with the fact that she didn't know what to do, and was no closer to any kind of answers. Hence why she spiraled, complained about the fact that they might not even be getting the videos that she's sending, and then ultimately deleted it. The subconscious theme of this episode in being comfortable with being alone and Carol also coming to terms with Helen's death and grieving her was continued again like when she got into her bed earlier on in the episode. But this time it was with the pack of coyotes that started to dig up Helen's grave that was in the backyard. The way that this scene played out was so painful. It was the night where Carol had a drink because the reality of being alone and being no closer to any answers had hit her all over again, and she wasn't comfortable with it. But with the coyotes back, Carol looked out the window and screamed no as they were digging up Helen. My stomach actually dropped at this scene because there was this haunting thought that went into my mind where Helen's body could potentially get dug up and consumed. The woman that Carol loved most in the world could have quite literally become dog food after being laid to rest if she didn't act quick enough. The handheld camera movement and it following behind Carol really encapsulated that sense of panic that Carol had, and with her not being able to get the weapon out of the police car with it easily being solved with the press of a button, it just showed that in those sorts of situations, the easiest solution is the one that never really gets thought of. When Carol stepped outside, she essentially realized that she was offering herself up as dog food, and when it came to it, she cracked on the police siren and drove through her own fence in order to scare them away. There was something about when Carol woke up, there was just this peace and tranquility that was inside her for a brief moment, and it was as if her mind had just cleared. She realized that the solution to her problems could be right in front of her if she just breathed, such as the button to release the weapon and also the key to the handcuffs being on the very keys that she had in her pocket the entire time. This was when she got some concrete slabs, laid them down over Helen's grave, and it almost served as an act of finality in Carol realizing that Helen wasn't going to be coming back, and that maybe it was time to move on in some kind of way. Hence why the concrete slabs were laid down. You couldn't get under there now. The sun was also setting as she was doing it, and not only was this arguably one of the most beautiful shots in the show so far, but it symbolically represented the sun setting on that time in Carol's life. The headstone that Carol painted with Helen's name on was something that actually made me choke up a bit as well. It was beautifully painted, and seeing Carol do something with such love just felt strange. She wasn't able to say a word and was getting a bit choked up when looking over at it, and it did have a hold on me. Yes, she found a way to move on slightly in this episode, but it also showed that grieving is truly a process, and the steps that she made in Got Milk got her on the way. When Carol went to have a drink that night, the bag of white substance that the others were mixing with water dropped onto the floor, and that was where she saw a barcode on the side of the bag. Not the same barcode that was on a bag of dog food that was housed at the farmer's market store, but she saw where the bag was manufactured at Agrijet, and it led her to the warehouse. Whilst she was there, the music that provided tension was building, right up until she went into the refrigerator, peeled back a sheet that was covering something, then the music stopped, she gasped, and it fell silent. We didn't see what it was that she gasped at, but when looking at everything else that was in there, it was mainly fruit and veggies. However, with what Carol looked at being housed at the back, it really did get my mind going and thinking about what it could be. So let's theorize. First off, we know that the others don't intentionally cause harm to any living person or creature on the planet, so I can't imagine that it's going to be anything that they've done to cause harm. But it did get me thinking about a couple of different things. It got me thinking back to the sheer amounts of dead that were caused from when the joining took place and the rapid cleanup that occurred. So it made me wonder if Carol could have potentially stumbled across some of the dead that were being contained there because the others hadn't been able to deal with all of it yet. When thinking about how when we were first introduced to these bags as well in the episode, it had crows eating what was inside of it. Crows often eat the dead, so could the others be utilizing the dead in some kind of way and turning them into this mix that they combine with water? Or it also got me thinking about how they wanted to do all that they can to make Carol happy. So with Carol having a slightly confused look on her face to begin with when she pulled back the sheet, I wonder if they're almost doing something which is going to be focused on the mimicking of Helen. They know that Helen being gone is one of the largest sources of sadness for Carol, so is Helen's body actually underneath the grave that Carol spent so much time covering, or did she just stumble across her body being preserved in the refrigerator? Maybe the others dug it up and replaced it with one. I guess we'll just have to see. I can't actually believe that we were left on such a cliffhanger in this episode. I didn't expect it to conclude like that in the slightest, so we're gonna have to wait around 10 days until we get an answer to what it is that's underneath that sheet. So time will tell. My review of the episode. This was a strong episode of the show for sure. It's up there for me for being the best looking episode so far because some of the shots were simply gorgeous on the eye, and with the sheer emptiness that was present, it just looked stunning. I was really impressed with Rhea Seehorn. Usually she carries the episodes because she's one of barely anybody that's even there, but in this episode it was literally just her, so I was really impressed. It didn't actually feel like she didn't really interact with anybody for the most part, which I think is really impressive. It shows just how captivating the writing is and how strong her performance is too. The core theme of moving on, entering different stages of grief, and Carol trying to adopt a slightly calmer mindset was something that really cut through in this episode. I do often think that Carol comes across as a character that I couldn't really care for when she speaks with the others. But then, when I see her grieving process and the pain that she's going through in not having Helen around, it does hit all the feeling points. It's because that feels like it's the one time where we get raw emotion from her and she's acting pure and just like a human. So I do hope we see more of that. One thing that I loved in this episode was the way that the voicemail message was used. At first, I felt tricked just like Carol in thinking somebody was actually there, but then in hearing it again and again and again, it kind of encapsulated something that's gotten a bit lost with time. Everyone is so attached to their phones now that nobody ever really misses a call, so the frustrating nature of having to wait until the end of a voicemail that feels like it's going to go on forever was pretty funny, but also got across the frustration. As per usual with this show, the cinematography is just as good as what the writing is. It blows me away with the sheer amount of space that gets captured in frame, and it makes the vast open landscape of Albuquerque a character in a show that barely has any characters in it. The scene with the Coyotes was one that really got me sitting up during the episode and made me feel like a part of it. That harrowing, panic-filled no that Carol shrieked broke my heart, and I felt the pain that she was in right at that moment. If I'm looking at one thing in particular that I wasn't really a fan of, it's so small, but I feel like I have to call it out. It's the time-lapse of when Carol was asleep in the hospital. It just didn't quite match the tone, and I didn't quite like its execution. They could have just done a straight cut, and it would have got the same thing across. I'd also say that I missed Zosia in this episode, so it shows that she's a well-written character that I like a lot. Leaving us on a cliffhanger like that did surprise me, but I thought it worked. It really has left me wondering what it is that Carol's laid her eyes upon and if it's going to be important, so I don't mind that it did that. It's the first time the show's really done it, and it picked the perfect time to, just after halfway through the season. So, there you have it, Pluribus Episode 5 Ending Explained. If you want to see every episode of Pluribus being broken down, then check the playlist below. I'm covering it every week as well as providing my theories, so be sure to subscribe to the channel. What do you think Carol saw? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.